Okay, everyone. I I've now got my scene pretty much where I want it. I've set up my objects. I've got everything looking good composition wise. I'm very happy with that. But what I found was that I had to go back and add more polygons to the object because I wasn't quite happy with the displacements. There wasn't enough detail for what I wanted for the scene. So if you actually look, here's again the transform model. There's a lot more detail in there. So I had to go back and just subdivide the model one more time before I started adding the displacements to it. So that gives us an extra level of detail. So I think, let's have a look, 65,000 polygons. So depending on the speed of your hardware, then you can go up to whatever what you want really. But at this point, there's not much point adding much more detail as we're going to be painting on it rather than animating it anyway. So let's have a look at our lighting. We've got our scene set up. I'm just going to position the light now, the light source for where I want it. I wanted something probably mid-afternoon, sort of late afternoon, so the sun will be quite low in the sky. Some sort of dramatic light shining maybe through the different peaks. And let's have a look and test and see what that looks like. Very dramatic. Not very good at. So we need to add. Let's change the backdrop color, and we'll probably need to add in a light source for our global illumination, which we'll do in a bit. So let's just use the same image that we used for the displacements just to see what that changes. That one. Okay, so that's looking a little better. We've got some nice soft shadows. We've got a good strong light source. Everything's a little blue for the moment, but that's not such a bad thing. So let's just render that through. I like the shadows quite a lot. It's not looking too harsh. It's important to try and figure out what time of day you do want the scene to be at, and then use the light accordingly for that. There's no point having things that are brilliantly lit if there's no obvious light source in your scene. So it's important to try and be consistent with that. So okay, so it's a basic view of where we are now, which is a good start. So we'll save that out. And this we can then use to create a sky background. So if we bring that into Photoshop, there we go. Now what we can do now is start to add in a sky, which we can then take back into the 3D program and render out. So I've got our alpha layer there, which is going to be useful just to map over some of the objects or not. We'll do it. So let's try and find a sky image. I've got some stuff here. Where is my image? Okay, so this is my sky map. Nothing too fancy, just a photo of the sky which I flipped and I mirrored. It's the same resolution as my 3D scene, so it's going to fit perfectly within the camera, and it matches how I want the scene to be lit. So I'm going to take that, copy it onto our original render, which is at 50%. So I just need to reduce it to 50%. And then if we select either the color range, or if we select our 3D, we can then just for a test delete that, and that's how the scene would look. So we've got our light source in the same position here as it is in our 3D scene or thereabouts. We can set that after, and it's not looking too bad. The color of the terrain doesn't really match the color of the sky, but we can work on that. We can sort of fog it over a little bit just for effect. if I paste back in what I cut out before. So yeah, we'll use that. So I'm going to bring this image into the 3D program and then set that as my backdrop. So let's do that now. And then we'll load that in. Okay. So it's important to have the image as the same size as the scene is in the camera. So let's use that as our background image. Et voila. So then I might just need to adjust the position of the light to match the position of the sun in our image. And let's just look at this how, from the light point of view, just angle it down a little bit to the camera. Let's push it back so it's behind the objects and see how that works. Let's just adjust the intensity a little bit more. The color obviously needs to match the color of how I think it's going to be, so maybe a sort of orangey kind of sunset color, nothing too strong. And we'll just render out that image quickly so we can see. Okay, that looks quite nice. You can just see that coming together. Okay, so it's beginning to come together a little bit. I'm now gonna actually, because this is now a light source image, I'm just gonna blur that a little bit just to, well, I actually have to use an instance of it because it's still being used as a deformation map. So I'm gonna just tweak the light source in the scene for our global illumination and just rotate the image around just to see if that changes the color of the bounce light of the global illumination. So you can see that's become a little bit yellower as the image is rotated, but it's still maybe a little bit too blue. Let's just tweak that a little bit more. Maybe a little bit too much bounce light. We want there to be some evidence of shadow in there. Okay. And then we'll add in some volumetric, some fog. And we'll set that to use the image of the background as the color of the fog. So whatever image is behind those mountains there will take on the same color from the image. So let's just set that. If we have the camera selected, then we should start to see a circle boundary of where the fog will be. So let's say it's 17 kilometers. We'll just adjust that down to 60%, and then let's have a look. Okay, that looks a little better. The lighting has got some nice shading around the front here. Shadow from the peak on the left, and then the mountains have now taken on a little bit of the sky color. We can see a little bit of the clouds there, so I probably need to tweak that a bit more, but as we're going to be painting over this anyway, it doesn't really matter too much, I don't think. But we can adjust how much fog is going through each object. So if I adjust the peak on the back to have a little bit less fog, just reduce that down a little bit more, push it back a tad, then we can see again it's just taken on a little bit less, so that's beginning to look good. Okay, so it's still got a little bit of fog there, but the shadows look good. We've sort of got this nice shadow at the front, which is leading you into the image, which is helping you going to be look at the focal point, which is going to be the center of our image, where we're going to add in a spaceship in a bit. So we're quite happy with that as far as the scene goes. So that's going to be our focal point right here, where our crash site is. And let's load up my 3D object of my spaceship, which is nothing special. It's part of an old object, I think. Very basic geometry on it. I've set some default settings for the surface. I'm not going to go too much detail here, and there's a little texture map added onto the thing. So I think this was a free texture map from the internet, something like that. It's not something I've done, but it's just going to be useful for this. It's just a basic sci-fi texture. So for the jets and stuff, I just added a basic metal surface, and we don't need too much detail. We just need enough to suggest it is what it is. So let's try to find a good position for our object here. Let's just correct that rotation. It's a little difficult to see. Let's just, there we go. Move that. I need to scale it and probably move it a bit closer to the camera, just to try and tweak, and just basically you need to just see how it's going to work for you, really. Just if you think it looks good, it probably does. So I'm just going to be trying to fiddle around with this for a little bit. That looks okay, maybe a bit wider. Okay. So what I like to do sometimes is add on a clip map, which is a black and white image added to the spaceship, which is gonna render or not render some parts of the image depending on the image. So I'm gonna add this in, and it's a black and white map like that, which is done in Photoshop. And then what this will do when we render it is you'll see that it's rendering out the white parts and not rendering the black parts. So okay, we've got it set on the wrong setting there. Let's just abort that and invert the layer. So now it's rendering only the white parts and not the black parts of the image. So we're clipping those parts out. And there we go. That looks a lot better. That's gonna give an element to our ship if it's crashed, it's wreckage, that it's being deteriorated by the weather and stuff. And yeah, it's lost some paneling, and it's just made it a bit more interesting for us. I don't think it would have been enough just to have the spaceship there. So let's just try and maybe tweak it out a little bit. Let's re-render. Okay, that's looking nice. We've got that nice perspective looking down the ship. It's in a good position. There's good shadowing on it, and looks quite interesting. Maybe we could do something a little bit more. Sometimes I try to tweak it a little bit by testing out the different lenses on the camera, the 3D camera, and just try a fisheye lens and see if that adds anything to the perspective, just a little bit more. Let's render that. Okay, so that does add something a little bit more interesting, I think. Sort of see how the lens is distorting the edges of the image, and these peaks are now bending inwards, which helps frame up the image quite a lot and draws you into it. Makes the composition just a little bit more interesting. Again, at the front we've got something which is quite nice shadows and stuff. Okay, so I'm beginning to like that, and we can see through the ship as well, where the clip map has rendered out parts of the object, which are good. So I'm going to set my, I'm going to work at 50%, I'm going to render it, and that will probably be it for a 3D part of it. If I render that out full resolution, let's just check actually that I might render this object just on its own, which will allow us to create an alpha map from that render, which will allow us in Photoshop to simply select this part of the image and paint specifically on that. So you can do that with each object, render things out separately, bring in the alpha maps into Photoshop, and paint specifically on certain parts of the image, which is quite useful. So we'll render this and we'll take it out into Photoshop.